there was a power that literally passed through me. Best way to describe it is like a screen, an invisible screen went from my head all the way through my body down through my toes.
Welcome to Cajun Miracles. I have with me as my guest Greg Schwab. We've been friends for over 30 years, and we were both in the same prayer group under Father Dwayne Stencil, just like Paul was in the previous episode. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me. So I appreciate you inviting me here. It's kind of daunting, of course, to be on a podcast. A little bit. Never did this before. But you asked me to share a little bit some of my experiences and how I guess I got restarted in my faith. So I'm presently 58 years old, and I was raised Catholic in Houma. Both my parents are Catholic. I have 3 siblings, and we were all raised Catholic, went to daily weekend mass weekly without exception during, when I was a child. And everything, was pretty normal as a normal Catholic would be raised in today's world, I guess. Learned a lot of things in school, went to Catholic schools, at least half of my, for my education. Through high school, went to Vanderbilt, and as far as my faith life went, I guess it could best be summed up with the following: I hoped God existed. I had faith to some extent that He did, but I certainly didn't know Him and had not experienced Him per se in the physical in any way. I didn't really know my faith that well, although, I certainly learned things which later were important about my faith and helped me understand it much, much better. So I had that background, thank God. And so there I was. It's high school, graduated, went to college, stopped going to weekend mass. Pretty much walked away from my faith. Always wanted to have a better faith life, but didn't really know how. And went to college. I went to a Methodist college. I traveled and up with people, which is a good philanthropic venture, I guess. Traveling around the world, living with people, promoting unity amongst people. Especially at the time, Russia was it was a Cold War, and of course the race relations throughout the world. Travel with people from all over the world in a group that promoted unity in essence. So that part was, at least on the surface, I had good intentions, perhaps, but for the most part, I walked away from my faith and just joined the world. I went to college, got a degree, didn't know what else to do, became a lawyer, went to law school, graduated from law school, got married, started having children. And about age 30 in 1996, I had been practicing, a few years with law, and I thought to myself interiorly that perhaps this is all there is, with regard to faith life and God, knowing whether or not He exists or not. I really hoped that He existed, but I didn't know. So a fellow attorney in town, an older fella, Mr. Joe Waits Sr., had been traveling to a place in Conyers, Georgia. A fellow classmate of mine in high school, John Waits, and his father invited my wife and myself to travel to Conyers. And I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about anything about it. And they literally just told me that, hey, we'll pay for your flight. Just come with us and just see what it's all about. And I heard stories from John, for example, of miraculous things happening at Conyers. Like he told me that he had witnessed rose petals falling from the sky, for example, in Conyers, and various other little stories. They didn't really tell us a whole lot, but I knew them, I trusted them, I liked them, and they would invite me on a free vacation. I was in. So my wife was in, and so two other friends of ours, J.J. Buquet, Tom Watkins, also flew up to Conyers. And so what was happening there was a woman who they call a visionary because she's allegedly having visions of various spiritual things. I had never heard of such a thing. I really didn't know anybody who had visions. It was a foreign concept to me. And I wondered to myself, is it possible that somebody could have visions, or is it a mental thing? I mean, is it a psychological thing? And so, of course, as a lawyer, you think, very in specific ways about evidence and what's considered legitimate evidence and what's trustworthy and things like that. So without even thinking about it, my own mind was taking all this information in and calculating the probabilities of things. And so without going through too many particulars, the night, it was on October the 13th that supposedly the Blessed Mother was making appearances to this woman, and people were gathering around and listening to her and whatnot. And so that's why we were there. It was October the 13th, 1996. And so the night before, we flew in and we stayed in this woman's house in her basement, along with a whole bunch of other people in the Waits family. And various...
So isn't her name Nancy Fowler?
Her name is Nancy Fowler. Yeah. So various things happened that evening that I don't guess bears repeating because I don't want to bore people, but things like, for instance, on the grounds at night, we were walking around and I saw a statue of the Blessed Mother weeping tears out of her eyes. And so it's odd. I've never heard of that happening. I didn't understand why it would be happening, but I certainly saw it happen. And I guess the best way to describe it is you sort of stand there looking at the statue crying like a dog would be looking at a TV. The dog doesn't understand what's on the TV, and he doesn't comprehend. So I was sort of like, that it's happening was important. But once you see that it's happening, then you begin to calculate in your mind, well, how could it be made to happen? There were people praying the rosary, as I recall, or something like it, which I learned as a child, but certainly couldn't do at the time. I had no idea really how to pray the rosary independently. And it was certainly a holy place, and it was odd that it was happening. And so I wondered honestly to myself, well, if it is legitimate, which I wasn't sure, why would that be happening? Why would she be crying? In other words, of all the things that would be happening, why would she be crying? What's the purpose of her crying? It certainly, tears normally mean sorrow. And if the Blessed Mother is sorrowful, why would she be sorrowful? I had no idea. I really didn't. As sad as it sounds, it's embarrassing that I didn't understand. But I thought to myself, why? Why is she crying? So a couple other things happened that evening which were, noteworthy. But the following day, before the apparition was supposed to occur at around noon, we all went to Mass off-site. And during Mass, which was the first Mass I had attended in a long time, I didn't know anybody there, and there was a lot of people where we were, I guess all coming in from out of town. And it was during the elevation of the host during Mass, which I'm embarrassed to admit that I did not understand my own faith enough to know that we believe as Catholics that during Mass, the Jesus appears, of course, and the host literally turns into his body, and it becomes Jesus. I did not know that. I don't know how I missed that part. I had my first communion at St. Gregory here, and I remember my first communion, but I don't know how I didn't realize that was the case, sadly. But nevertheless, during the elevation of the host, there was some power. It's hard to describe, that it wasn't my thinking. It was above my thinking. There was this power that I was experiencing to some extent, and it was awesome. That's the best way I can describe it. It was a power. That's the best way to describe it, I guess. And it made me very pensive, and I didn't know what to make of it. I had never experienced that, whatever that was, but it was memorable. After the Mass, we all went back to Nancy Fowler's house, and then near her house was this other little house where all the people were gathering around this house because that's where she would go when she had these visions. Now, I did not have any idea of the relationship of October the 13th to Fatima or Lourdes or any apparition of the Blessed Mother. I had no idea. I was completely and utterly ignorant. So we walked up, from her house into this field, into around this other little house, and there were people literally all over the place. I don't know how to imagine how many people there were, but there had to be way more than just 10. There were tens of thousands of people. Buses, cars, people everywhere, all surrounding this house. And the whole time people were praying the rosary again, which was memorable, of course. Why the rosary? Of all things, why were they praying the rosary? Something I had really not done and I didn't understand. But they were praying the rosary around this house before noon. And lo and behold, we must have been, Mr. Joe Waits obviously knew somebody. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, somebody comes out of the house and points at our group way in the distance. We're in the distance, and they pointing to us and saying, "Come here, come here." So, as it turns out, our little group was invited to go up on the porch of the house in which Nancy was going to have the apparition, allegedly. And so there I was on the porch, huddled around my wife and other friends of mine, John Waits, J.J. Buquet, Tom Watkins, Joe Waits Jr. and his wife, and other people, people I had known all my life, all these people. And right before the apparition was supposed to start, all of a sudden I hear that there were two girls. Actually, it was Giselle Waits, who is Joe Waits Jr.'s wife, and a friend of hers associated with Nichols was there. And both of them said, "Look, in the sky, in gold light, look at all the saints and the angels." And my wife and I know myself, I looked up in the sky and I see nothing but blue. There's blue sky. I can't see a thing. And so deep down, it's best to describe how I was feeling. All of a sudden, with the pronouncement by someone that I knew my whole life, very trustworthy, but not only her, but another witness, so that would be minimum two witnesses. And then you could hear the crowd murmur. At the same time, they're saying, "Look in the sky in gold light. You can see the angels and the saints." And so that's, empirical evidence that I'm witnessing happen. I can't see anything, but I'm smart enough to know that two people are agreeing in front of me, and then the rest of the crowd, you can hear the roar of the crowd, all in awe. They're oh, look. You can hear the people saying. And so instantly I made the deduction in my mind that, oh my word, there is such a thing as angels and saints. The fact that there are angels exist means there's spirituality that's happening, and it's alive. And number two, it's not only alive, but it's all around us, but I can't see it. It was quite profound and immediate, and it leaves you in awe. And so I'm thinking to myself interiorly, oh my word, what am I doing here? Of all the places on earth I could be, what am I doing on the very house of the place where this miraculous event is occurring? I am so unprepared. I am such a sinner. I suddenly realized that, oh my word, God does exist. He exists. And there are angels and saints all around us. And so therefore the things that I learned as a child must have been true. Oh my word, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I need to go far, far away. So interiorly, what I was feeling was I needed to go and be way in the back, in the woods, looking upon the scene, because I was so unworthy, literally, if everybody really knew how unworthy I was. I hadn't been to Mass in over a decade, probably, for the most part. I hadn't been to confession, certainly, in over a decade. And so that's what I was thinking. Oh my word, why am I here? Well, moments later, you could hear somebody say on the loudspeaker, the Blessed Mother is descending. And so as she began, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel. Because right after the announcement was made, while the people were still praying the rosary, allegedly the Blessed Mother was beginning to descend, I could feel this power that I've never felt like again in my life. There was a power that literally passed through me. Best way to describe it is like a screen, an invisible screen went from my head all the way through my body down through my toes. And as it descended upon me, and you could physically feel it go through your body, it was as if someone hooked me up to like an amplifier. And slowly but surely, you would turn the power source up. And it would kept increasing ever so slightly, but it didn't stop increasing. It was so powerful that my body was literally shaking. I began weeping. I mean, I could hardly catch my breath. And you would say, well, that sounds scary, but I wasn't scared at all. The power source was coming from outside of me. I'm the only one that knows this. After a little while, I'm thinking, oh my word, all these people around me, what in the world are they thinking is going on with me? I don't care. It was so powerful, but at the same time, it had a tenderness to it. The power was so powerful, and I'm weeping, I'm shaking, it's like my body is about to. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't breathe well. And as it's all happening, I begin hearing without my ears, or I had a knowing, if you would, without hearing it with my ears, someone was speaking to me. And that was just awesome. I mean, how do you even begin to explain that? And I later understand, I didn't know at the time, it's called an interlocution. I couldn't audibly hear it, but the words were impregnated. It was like it was being impregnated in my being. It it didn't I didn't have to process hearing through my brain to understand what was being said. It was being part of my being. And the words that were spoken, the first words that were spoken, I'll never forget, it was tender, yet powerful. And I would say, upon reflection, it certainly had a feminineness to it, a tenderness, so tender. And the words were, "You are lovable." Of all the things in the world that God wanted to impress upon me first, not "you're unworthy," not "what are you doing here," not "you didn't believe me," not all kind of things you can conjure up in your brain that you would think that God would want to tell you first. It was, "You are lovable." And it wasn't just telling me I was lovable. It was being impregnated into my person, into my body. And it was truth. In other words, it wasn't like when somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, you're such a good guy," or "Thank you so much for doing that." You have to allow it in and say, "Well, I did do okay on that one." It wasn't like that. It was no processing. It was a fact when God was saying, "You are lovable." Now, I say God because I didn't see who was speaking. I now, upon reflection, believe it was the Blessed Mother. I now, upon reflection, believe that it was so powerful because I now understand, which I didn't at the time, that wherever the Blessed Mother goes, along goes the Holy Spirit, God, of course. And so, for whatever reason, I'll never really know which of them or both of them, or it doesn't matter. The first words I was told was, "You are lovable." Now, you would say, "Well, Greg, that seems pretty obvious that God would want to tell people that he loves them." Yeah, but not me. It's not just, I don't take it for granted, because what no one else knows is I was raised real disciplined, like extremely disciplined. Not just a little bit disciplined, all the way disciplined. My mother, who raised me, was a drill sergeant. You ask anybody you want to talk to, she was a drill sergeant. She was not tender at all whatsoever, ever. I don't ever remember my mother telling me that I love you. I don't ever remember my mother telling me that I was lovable, ever. I don't remember anyone telling me that I was lovable, ever. So no one else around me would know that. Only I knew that. And obviously God knew that. I didn't understand that I needed to hear those words. I had no clue. No one could have, you couldn't have paid me any amount of money to guess that I had that as a problem. It wasn't until it happened, and upon reflection, looking back, of all the things that God could have said was, "You are lovable." Now, perhaps that's what he would say to every man. Of course he would, right? Of course that would be the message that God wants us to understand, is that we are lovable, that we can forgive ourselves for our actions. We can forgive ourselves for being, jerks. But I don't know where else to go with that other than to say that it was profound. Now, after that statement, and I'm still weeping and I'm grasping for air, all sorts of things occurred interiorly. And I say through locution, where it was literally impregnated into my soul, mind, and body. I was literally, I was taught things instantly. I knew things instantly that I didn't know before. Things like, one of the things that I remember most importantly would be on the issue of abortion. When I was in college, I was an English major, and I was made to write a paper on Roe v. Wade. And I did. I wrote a paper on Roe v. Wade, which is the abortion decision in law in the 1970s. And I honestly didn't know at the time or until then what the big deal was. In my silly mind, I was thinking to myself, well, if the court says it's legal, then it's legal. If the court says it's not legal, then it's not legal. Why are these people upset? It's just a fact of life. Whatever the court says that's what it is. I didn't even have enough understanding to know the moral issue involved. I never even dreamt of it. And so while this is happening, the best way to describe it was, all of a sudden I was enveloped in darkness. And I began to feel, it was as if God was, or the Holy Spirit or whatever, was having me experience the feeling, I guess. I say feeling, but the emotion or whatever it was, or the sorrow that God was feeling, or a minuscule speck of the sorrow that God experiences when we kill children in the womb, which I didn't understand in an abortion. Silly as it sounds, I didn't even process that part, that there's a child being killed. I didn't understand. I was thinking it was just atoms.
And you felt that sorrow.
I felt the sorrow. It was so sorrowful, I literally thought I was going to die. I thought for sure it was the end for me. I was like, oh, I can't make it past this. My body can't take the sorrow. It was so deep. I couldn't breathe. And so he was allowing me to understand how sorrow, of all the things in the world, he could tell me, was how sorrowful he was with us killing children. And so I came out of that experience. All kind of other things occurred. There were one of the things I was shown was, I didn't know that the church is led by the Holy Spirit. I guess I didn't process it, or I certainly didn't believe it. But now that it's happening to me and I'm seeing all this evidence, I'm understanding at that moment, oh my word, God does speak to his church. He speaks to his leaders. He speaks to everybody, of course, but I've since learned, but he leads his church through the Holy Spirit. I didn't understand that. And he allowed me to understand how absolutely in love he was with Pope John Paul. He was so, I was given to understand how absolutely wonderful Pope John Paul was, and that I should listen to him. Of all the people in the world, he was saying, and you listen to him. He is my shepherd, which I didn't know. I mean, I didn't process that. I just thought he was some figure, voted in, elected, or whatever. No, he's the real guy, and he's in charge of my church, and I speak to him similarly to the way I'm speaking to you.
Wow.
There were other things that came into focus, like, for instance, all that time that I had spent in, Catholic school or CCD when I was at Mulberry, which was a non-Catholic school, elementary, or we went to become confirmed in confirmation classes. All those things I had, not all, but a lot of those things I had learned in my mind, all of a sudden they just gelled. And I could see them and I could understand them so much differently than I had before. In other words, not only did I understand instantly that it's true, but I was allowed to understand things that I didn't understand before, and make the conclusions came in so fast and so rapidly. I knew things about my faith that I didn't even understand that I knew before. And I understood it so much better. It was powerful. So this all went on evidently while the Blessed Mother is having her talk with Nancy. And it lasted for, I really don't know. I didn't time it, but it was certainly I would say at least 10 minutes, I would think. And so a couple other things happened, but it doesn't bear mentioning. And then of course it left me just, very slowly, but it was so peaceful, so calming. I was so calm and so, I mean, it's hard to describe that feeling of what I just went through. I didn't care that all my partners were staring at me thinking, oh my God, he's having some sort of a exorcism or something, I'm sure. I guess to an extent I was, but I didn't care. All I knew, I couldn't talk. In fact, to this day, I don't remember, maybe I have. I don't think that I've shared with my wife all the details that I'm sharing today, which is why I'm excited partly to be here, because I haven't shared this even with my 5 daughters. I certainly haven't begun to share it with my 5 grandchildren that I have so far, and I'm sure I'll have more. So the fact that you're allowing me to record this for posterity, I'm hoping will touch them, and they will know that I'm telling them what happened to their grandfather and their husband and their dad. So I appreciate the opportunity. But so that's sort of how it ended at Conyers. And then, of course, we flew home. I didn't speak to my wife about it at all. I'm glad she didn't ask. We flew home that afternoon. And the next day, I go back to my office on Church Street, where I'm working with my father as a lawyer. And I'm having the compunction, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, the need to go to confession, which I haven't gone to confession in years. And I don't know any priests, and I don't know what to do. So I walk down the street, because my office literally is right down the street from St. Francis de Sales Cathedral in Houma. And I go knock on the rectory door, and I ask the woman who comes, and I said, listen, I need to go to confession like now. Is it available? No, I'm sorry, no one's in, but you can, and I forget, she might have said, leave your number or come back later or try before Mass, like I know or would know now, but I didn't know. And so I walk back to my office dejected, thinking to myself, man, I can't even get anybody to hear my confession right now. And I might have mentioned it to my secretary, Laura, at the time. And Laura walks in, and evidently I had a newspaper open on my desk or something, or some local newspaper or something. And I told her, I must have told her, I said, I was looking for a confessor to go to confession, and it didn't happen. And she said, oh, Greg, look, there's a priest I see right there on that newspaper. I recognize him from TV. I think he's at Lumen Christi. And so I'm like, yeah, okay. So I see his number must have been on the ad or whatever it was in front of me. I have no idea. But I picked up the phone and I called, and I get an answer from a fella. And I say, this is Greg Schwab. And it was a man. I said, this is Greg Schwab. I'm calling to see if I can speak to a priest about going to confession. And as I recall, and I'm almost positive, he said, yes, Greg, I've been waiting on your call. So as it turns out, and if he didn't say Greg, he said, yes, I've been waiting on your call. And it was Father Dwayne Stenzel, who became our spiritual director. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who don't know Father Dwayne, he literally was a saint. I mean, as close to being a saint as you can get. Very spiritual, so spiritual and in tune with God. He can hear God's voice. He gets directed by God all day long, where to go, where to walk, where to stop, who to talk to, when to pick up the phone, he literally lived his life in divine providence. And he picks up the phone and says, yes, Greg, or yes, I've been waiting on your call. And so I explained to him, Father, I need to go to confession. I don't want to impose, Father, but when would it be possible? He says, when would you like to go? I said, well, Father, I know better than the president. He says, well, I'll be waiting for you. And so I got in my car, middle of the afternoon drive all the way to Lumen Christi, which I had never been. and then I'm introduced to Father Dwayne. I'm sure we immediately went into confession, and when I went to confession to Father Dwayne, in that very first confession where I was confessing things, I mean, I had been since high school, college, law school. I mean, I did some really raunchy things, and I needed to unload it, and it took a while. Poor fella, but he had to listen. But during the confession, I had a similar experience with the powerfulness that was going on the day before, and it was with Father Dwayne. There was, it was, and I again was crying. I couldn't stop crying. And when I say crying, it's not an emotional cry. It's almost it's a cry literally that comes from outside of your body and makes you cry. And you're sitting there wondering, not necessarily that I'm so sorrowful, but I was. But it's a spiritual cry. It's hard to explain for those who have never experienced it, but it's true. So nevertheless, I meet with Father Dwayne, and to say the least, my life changed a lot. And he helped form and shape and change my life. Along with a bunch of other guys like Rick and Paul and people who have gone on. There's Pierre LePere. I mean, there's so many people. So after meeting Father Dwayne, and much to tell about that experience and those experiences with him, but just to say that I went back to St. Francis. I met Paul almost immediately, who was at daily mass, and then I began going to daily mass, and I went to daily mass at the various churches, mainly St. Francis, for years and years, and we joined a prayer group. We began meeting out at Lumen Christi, all kind of things. So many other stories, but I'm afraid to share them all in one podcast because my grandkids don't have long attention spans. So,
thank you, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.